The house was only about 10 years old, and the previous owners had the thing built specifically for them. A big mistake on their part. They hadn't been able to afford all the things they wanted, and were finally being forced to downsize due to the debt they racked up over it. Their misfortune, but my gain. I know that's kind of callous of me to think, but I didn't really have much sympathy for the couple. I'd met them once before closing, and they're exactly the special brand of stupid that opens up a brand new credit card just to pay off an older one. The kind of people who had money once upon a time and just threw it everywhere to show off. The house reflected that. It was a beautiful place to see from the street. 2 stories, well maintained, and a picturesque front yard. But take even one step towards either side of the house, the perfectly maintained yard gave way to weeds and bare spots, and one side of the house had like green algae or something growing on it, while the other looked like it had never seen a power washer ever. All their money had gone towards maintaining the visible front yard, and not much else was taken care of. The inside was the same. The foyer and living room were warm, beautiful rooms, but it was very clear that the care given to those 2 rooms had not extended to the rest of the house at all. The kitchen still had some kinds of a stove fire all around it, no doubt from the cheap stove that I ended up replacing immediately. The large guest bathroom was ornate and fancy looking, right up until I got a brighter light bulb in there and saw how badly joined the granite-looking tiles were, and how some of the fancy carvings on the ceiling looked to be glued there with hot glue. The rooms upstairs were painted horribly in dark colors, and one room bore the telltale smell of animals not allowed outside enough. The room I chose for my own had 3 different colors on the walls. One was a puke green, 2 were a navy blue so dark it made the room shrink, and the last wall looked like it had been painted with that chalkboard black stuff. I could barely make out scribbles and lines on the surface, the ghosts of drunken nights with chalk that made me wonder for the first time how young the couple had been when they bought it. The master bath had a jacuzzi-style tub that didn't actually work, and a shower stall too small for any normal human being to comfortably wash in. The drains were sluggish and needed an immediate look-over from a good plumber before they clogged entirely. An inside wall, I discovered, was crooked too. Nothing was going to hang flat on it, as the base of the wall was tilted in just enough that it took me a few days to figure out why the wall bothered me so much. Don't even get me started on the mess that was the attic. The place was obviously going to take a lot of work to clean up. I knew that coming in, even though I hadn't realized exactly how much work was needed. But the price had been right, and nothing that needed to be fixed was anything critical. The house was still standing and would continue to stand for years to come. Besides, it beat living in another tiny apartment. Even if I did nearly break my neck the first time, I tried cleaning years' worth of accumulated crud out of the gutters. It took me a while to get the house in order. Every time I'd get something cleaned or fixed, I'd find another thing that would make me up my estimation of the stupidity of the former owners yet again, or marvel at how the house could still be standing. It was nothing too expensive or hard for me to do on my own, though. I like working with my hands, so the work wasn't too bad in the end. It was just annoying. The worst of it, though, was the backyard. It was a fairly decent-sized place, shaped more like a diamond than a square, due to a strip of wooded land that butted up against my property. The owners had kept a few trees, which gave the yard a nicely shaded area in the summer. The one and only good thing they'd done in the yard. The rest of it was a mess. It looked like they tried their hand at gardening once. There were raised beds strewn around the yard with no pattern to them, and the sparsely mulched raised areas around the trees were overgrown with a tangle of English ivy and weeds that spread well into the yard. The ivy, an annoyingly invasive species, was a lazy man's garden. It took no care at all and covered a large amount of ground with its glossy leaves. Pretty to look at, yeah, but care had to be taken that it never grew beyond where it was wanted, and the previous owners had really not even bothered holding it in check. The ivy was rooted everywhere. I pretty much started at the back door and just worked my way back out from there. Pulling it all up, cutting the vines where it was too thick to drip weed killer directly into the stems, and marking it so I could, hopefully, eradicate the root system entirely the next year. I worked on the yard as much as I could stand, all through the summer months and well into fall. The weather was threatening to freeze the ground, making pulling the plants impossible. I should have let the whole thing be and just continued when spring came, but I was close to getting all the ivy pulled and stubbornly didn't want to quit until I had to. That just meant less work for me next year. The furthest corner of the yard from the house was dense with ivy. All the other weeds had died off with the cold, but it still clung on tenaciously. It was so thick that I wasn't even sure there was a fence extending under it until the blade of my trimmer hit it. It took me a few days to cut away enough of the ivy that I could get down on my hands and knees to start digging up the roots. I was in good spirits, though, because the end was finally in sight. Sure, I'd have to go back and pull again in spring, but it wouldn't be nearly as bad, and I'd have a nice blank slate to start from for planting. I was happily planning what plants to buy next year when I hit the first stone. It was a smooth gray stone, sunk into the ground and about a few inches wide all around. I dug down the side a few inches and found the bottom. It was regularly shaped and cut to be that way. A paver stone hidden in the corner of the yard leading to nothing. I rolled my eyes at the familiar stupidity and left the stone alone. I'd dig it up next year and put it somewhere more appropriate. I kept pulling, though, and found another stone, and then another. They were all overlapping and set in the ground oddly. They weren't laid out like they were fencing in a garden, and I wondered if the old owners had gotten tired of the stones and just threw them into the corner. They were nice-looking stones. I couldn't understand why they didn't want to use them. That's when I found a stone that was different from the others. It was smoother, and it took me a bit to realize it was marble. I wiped at the dirt that nearly covered it, and the white of the stone came through in places. But I could feel the grooves in it even through my gloves. Curious, I kept wiping until the only dirt left was in the carvings on the marble. They were rough lines cut into crude-looking letters, clearly not done by an expert, so it took me a few minutes to puzzle out what I was looking at. A name and 2 dates side by side. James Landon, Jr. Confused, it took me a minute to see that the dates were only a year apart. I stepped back, baffled, and when I did, I was able to see what I hadn't been able to see before. The stepping stones I'd been uncovering were mounted up before the marble in a small rectangular formation, one lying on top of the other in a neat little hill to cover something. I was looking at a grave, one that wasn't any bigger than the length of my arm.